beneficial to avoid and overcome. Here's the presentation outline. We're going to do an introduction, and then we're going to go through the different mistakes that we're going to be looking at. For example, the first one there says adopting poor examples in growing practices. We're going to look at the soil, uh, take a look at some of the varieties and how that can be an issue with growing your garden. We're going to talk about the plants and how important it is to grow them at the proper time. And one thing that's a big issue for a lot of people are weeds. We're going to look at controlling weeds. And also, for those that think they can't have a garden because they don't have a space, I'm going to dispel that idea and show you that regardless, everyone can do something to grow some of their own food. And finally, we're going to wrap it up with looking at seeds and plants. And then we're going to have some time at the end for questions and answers. And give me 1 second. I'm just trying to move something. Okay, I'm going to have to restart my screen share. Okay, so now the introduction. I'm going to start out by mentioning that some mistakes are going to be unavoidable. We all make mistakes in the garden, and I don't care how long you've been gardening, you're still going to be making mistakes. And some people talk about people that are master gardeners. I feel like you never become a master gardener because there's always going to be things for you to learn and to improve on. Then there are some mistakes that can be avoided just by learning from others. And that's the whole point of attending things like this presentation or going to workshops or even just looking at courses and lessons online. You can learn and avoid mistakes by learning from the mistakes that others have made that are going to share with you what they did wrong, and how they overcame those mistakes. Then you should not worry about trial and errors. You're going to have those, and that's part of learning and improving your skills. And it's always good to be willing to experiment with things that you don't know or things that you aren't sure of. You can just try and see what the results are, and you'll learn from those challenges and from the trials that you encounter. One thing that is a big influence on a lot of people is the practices that are handed down. And a lot of those are from commercial farmers. And a lot of us think that, okay, they're the professionals. We need to, even if we're growing things in our backyard, we need to follow their example. And that's not really the case. And sometimes that's going to be the worst thing that you can do is to follow their example because their objectives are entirely different than what ours are going to be. Then there's a saying that says the best fertilizer is the gardener's footsteps. And we're going to talk about that again at the very end of the presentation. Here's a quote. This I always share some scripts, some not scriptures, but quotes from Ellen White. And this was one thing that she wrote. It says, many farmers have failed to secure adequate returns from their lands because they have undertaken the work as though it was a degrading employment. They do not see that there's a blessing in it for themselves and their families. All they can discern is the brand of servitude. Their orchards are neglected, their crops are not put in at the right season, and a mere surface work is done in cultivating the soil. Farmers need far more intelligence in their work. In most cases, it is their own fault if they do not see the land yield its harvest. They should be constantly learning how to secure a variety of treasures from the earth. The people should learn as far as possible to depend upon the products that they can obtain from the soil. And I think that's just good to reflect on and think about just the fact that there is so much that we can get out of gardening and growing our gardens, from the food to the exercise to just being in communion with God as we're working in nature, working with Him, because He is the one that enables us to reap results from the garden. He is in ultimate control of the plants, their growth, the soil, the health, everything. He can control that. and we need to seek Him as we're working with our gardens and plants. Now, I did have some quotes that were at the very beginning. I don't know if they showed up when I did the screen share, but it was just going back to the Garden of Eden, um, back in Genesis. I think the first one was from chapter 2, and then there was a quote scripture from chapter 3. But it was just reflecting on the fact that God placed Adam, He placed man in the Garden of Eden, and that was where he was put to, and it says to dress and keep the garden. And then in that was before sin. Then in chapter 3, there was a verse about how when God banned him from that Garden of Eden and he sent him out into the earth, the land, and at that point he was to work the garden. It wasn't more just a matter of dressing it and tending it. From there, it was going to be actual labor involved. That wasn't the original intent. But now it was going to be work, and it talks about the sweat of Adam's brow and thorns and things that were going to be encountered from that point on. And that's where we are now. We're dealing with thorns and trials, and it takes effort and rocks and digging. And all of that is for our ultimate good, because even that can teach us lessons and to draw our mind closer to God and the things that He wants us to experience and to reflect on and to realize that, a lot of this is a result of sin. The picture here, this is a photo from one of my gardens where I lived in Pennsylvania, and this was in a suburban neighborhood, but there, my lot might have been like a third of an acre, but I still had room to grow all kinds of, vegetables and fruits and berries. And you can see there I had beehives and all of that in a small area. So you don't have to have a lot of space, and you can grow a garden even in cities. And I've done it in, everything from apartments to suburban areas. And, we'll talk about that more as we go on. The next picture, this is just to give you a sense that, the garden doesn't have to be something that is just ugly or not attractive, because that's what a lot of people think about when they think about vegetable gardens. They don't realize that they can be some of the most attractive gardens that you can grow. And this is just showing you that you can incorporate things like flowers. And what I do is even the flowers that I incorporate, I'll do edible flowers. So that's still, it's not just a matter of being ornamental. It still has some function, whether it's a herb, something that can be used for health and healing, or something that's just a good edible. Okay, another good point about growing a garden is that it gives you opportunities to interact with your neighbors, your community. I do it in the terms of going to the farmer's market, but also just in terms of sharing fresh produce from my garden. These are a couple of boxes that I'll put together just to share with some of my neighbors. And it's something that, even if it's a stranger, you don't know them, this is something that's going to open them to being receptive and give you the opportunity to get to know them and share with them. And it's something in one way that they're going to be willing to accept that. I mean, who would refuse a box of just beautiful tasty tomatoes and herbs? So that's just another way of reaching out to your neighbors. Now, the first mistake that a lot of people, I mentioned earlier, about adopting the example from a commercial farmer and trying to grow or garden like a commercial farmer. And a lot of people there, they'll start gardening, and the first thing they think about is, oh, I want to farm. I want to have a farm. And what's on their mind is they think they have to have acres and acres of ground and huge gardens and tractors and equipment and tons of seeds and everything, because they're trying to mimic what they see in whether it's on TV, whether it's in books, or just, historically what a farm, what a garden is like. But that's not necessarily the case. And a lot of times it's better to have a small plot than a large one. And I know even some professional farmers that have been growing on larger acreage, even if it was only like 5 to 10 acres, and then they scale back to maybe 3 or 4 acres, and they discovered that they could produce more and even generate more income on less land than they did when they had bigger acreage that they were farming. And that's because they were better able to manage it and handle it and take care of it. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. Even if you're in the backyard doing a backyard garden, don't think that you have to use all of your space and convert that into garden, especially when you're first starting out. It's best to start with a smaller section. And then when you see that you can manage that and keep that properly weeded from that point on, then expand out. But don't just start out from the very beginning, just tilling up the entire backyard. That might be a mistake. Also be creative and focus on more like a farmer. That for a farmer, it's a business. So that's what their focus is on, making a profit, the bottom line. That doesn't have to be your focus. You can be more creative. You can have goals that don't have anything to do with making money. It can be, just the enjoyment, the pleasure of growing a garden. It can be part of it, just the nutritional value, the health benefits that you're going to receive from growing your own fresh produce and being able to feed that to your family, the flavors, the better flavors and taste that you can get from fresh homegrown produce. So you're going to have different objectives than a commercial farmer. Some of the things that you see with farming is a lot of times there'll be monocropping and there'll be just huge acreage where they're growing nothing but corn or just soybeans, or it's just that their entire farm or acreage is devoted to one thing. That's something that you're not going to do with a backyard garden or even a small farm setting. You have the opportunity to just have lots of variety, lots of diversity, and that's something that will help you, especially just in terms of even things like pests and diseases. They're a lot more of an issue if you're just growing one crop, because then there could be a pest to that crop. And for example, if you were just growing corn and the worm caterpillar that affects corn, they could get in there and they could just be a major issue and wipe out the entire crop. Versus if you had a lot of different things, it would be, more more difficult for the pest to, first of all, find the crop that it's after, and then to really multiply and expand using a smaller portion of if you just have a small section devoted to that crop. Another issue is with cultivation. A lot of people, gardeners, they just over cultivate, over till their land. They think that every year or every crop. So in some cases, they could be tilling their gardens 3 and 4 times during a single season, where that constant cultivation is not good. It's not good for the soil. We're going to cover that more as we go on. Another focus for a commercial gardener or farmer is growing in rows. That's something that on a small scale in the backyard, you don't have to grow your plants in rows, but still, most people still do. And that's something, again, that's just carried over from the practices of commercial farmers. And the reason they grow in rows is just to make it more convenient to have their big machinery and their tractors, but that's not going to be an issue if you're on a small scale, and you probably won't even be using a tractor. And that's the next point there. Don't become dependent on big machinery and equipment. And I use equipment like I use tillers, I have tractors, but my tractors I don't even use in the garden. They're used more outside of the car garden. And you don't want to become dependent, and in most cases you don't even need a tractor, and it's best to not, for things like tillers, rather than buy a tiller, you could just rent a tiller if you're just going to be using it once in the springtime to till your garden. And in some cases you'll get to the point where you don't even need to till your garden every year if you're using certain things like raised beds. That's something that you can get to where you never would need to use a tiller. You should also always research your options and alternative growing methods and not just get stuck with what you've used in the past or what you see other people using, because there are so many different methods that you can utilize, and we'll be covering some of those today. And, and is there a question, or does someone just need to mute? Okay, apply skepticism towards things that you see on the internet. Because I see things on the internet where people are growing things and or using certain methods where they're getting things to grow. And I'll look at it, I was like, that I don't know about that. And usually it's something that it is fake. And now it's even worse with AI. There's just so many things that, people can do, and it looks real, but it's not. So you have to be careful about that also. This picture just shows one of this is of my property here in West Virginia, and one of the beds, gardens that I'm growing some leafy greens in. And this is just showing you some of the different methods, different techniques you can use. On the left side of the screen, that's a raised bed where the they're using the timbers, the boards in there to as a frame for their raised bed. With raised bed, a lot of people don't understand raised bed. They think that they're like lifted way up in the air, which they can be, but not necessarily. And in this case, it's only raised maybe 4 or 5 inches, but you don't even have to use boards. I do raised beds and I never use any type of border or frame on the outside. I just have a gradual slope on that edge there. But the advantage of raised beds is that you're never walking on the actual growing surface. So your ground doesn't get compacted. You also only water and fertilize the space that you're actually growing plants in. So that there are a lot of advantages to using raised beds. I like using them, but there are certain things that do better in like a row. Like if you're growing corn, that does do better growing it in rows than in a raised bed. But you can. I don't know that there is anything that you can't grow in a raised bed, but certain things I do prefer to grow in a field, like corn or even sweet potatoes and certain squashes that are vining plants, melons. I don't grow them in raised beds. On the upper right side, this was my property in Pennsylvania, and it was just a little ornamental area that I had planted around a tree. So I had a smaller space to work with, but I would put little garden beds in all over the place. Along the side of the house, I had blueberries. Here, I had some ornamental and some herbs and some medicinal plants growing just around a tree. And the lower right side there, it shows using your vertical space. Those are peas that are growing up on just a little trellis, a little wire fencing type material as a trellis. Again, this photo is also showing using your vertical space. That's something that usually farmers don't utilize that space. They're growing because they don't need to. They have like big areas to work with, so they're not limited usually on space. So they really don't worry about or utilize the vertical space. But I like to use it even if I wasn't or if I wasn't limited on space, I would still like to use the vertical space because certain plants grow better there. In this picture, it's tomatoes that are growing up vertically. Certain things like cucumbers, those do better. Those do well on a trellis, and it helps keep the fruits, the produce clean. The next common mistake is treating the soil like dirt. And by that, or one of the things related to that is that the soil is more important and complex than a lot of us realize. We don't realize the importance of the soil or the significance that it has. We think it's just something that, you just plant your seeds in and that's it. But really, there's a lot more to the soil, and the soil is alive. It's full of life, microorganisms, and those are the things that are really supporting and caring for the plants. They're providing food for the plants and supporting their growth. So it's important to come to an understanding of how the soil is alive and that there are certain things that you don't want to do. Like if you're putting chemicals on the soil, that's going to compromise that soil life. That's going to destroy a lot of the activity that's in the soil. And the next point there, it says don't fertilize the plants. And the point being that, you don't want to feed the plants, you want to feed the soil. And if you're feeding the soil, and more correctly, the organisms in the soil are going to be the ones to feed the plants. And a lot of times people think, oh, my soil is deficient in certain things. and that's not always the case. It may be that your soil has the elements that it needs, but it just doesn't have the organisms that are needed to kind of manage the inputs that are in the soil, to manage them and make them available, free them up that the plants can utilize them. Excessive tilling, I mentioned tilling and about how, just constant and excessive cultivation is not good for the soil. And the problem there is that it disturbs the structure. There's a certain structure to the soil. Plus, there are those organisms that I just mentioned that are living in the soil, everything from earthworms to just microorganisms, the mycorrhizal. There's just so much going on in the soil. And the more you disrupt it by cultivating it, is then you're just basically stirring everything and putting things in places that they normally wouldn't be. In some things like the earthworms, you could even be killing them in the process of tilling your soil. So if you can limit that as much as possible, that's better. The other thing is the compaction. If you compact your soil, then that's going to damage it. It's going to remove that airspace. It's going to make the soil poor draining. It just creates a lot of issues. And you may say, okay, well, if I can't till the soil, if I'm not supposed to till it, then how do I avoid the compaction? And part of that is I mentioned before about if you're not walking on the soil, walking on it does compact it. Working the soil when it's wet, that's something that is very detrimental to the soil. You should avoid that. You shouldn't do anything to the soil, even walk on it. If it's wet, it's been raining, and the soil is saturated, you shouldn't walk on it. You definitely shouldn't till it. That just messes up the structure of the soil. And the point there about healthy soil is essential to our health and well-being. Going back to the scripture that I mentioned, or the other scriptures in Genesis, it talks about how, God made us, created us from the earth. That's what He formed us. We were made from that. So, and there are things that are components of the soil that are components within our bodies. A lot of times, where nowadays people are more aware, and you see more publicity about the mycorrhizal and your bacteria in your gut bacteria, things like that. So, and that carries over into a lot of other areas, whether it's composting or people that are doing fermenting, or even certain things like breads. There are organisms, there are things that we can't even see, but they're a part of that. They're a part of us, and they're a part of the soil as well. One thing that you can do, especially if you're just starting with your garden, is test your soil. There are labs in most states where you can send a soil sample, and they'll test it. In a lot of cases, they'll do it for free or for a very nominal amount. So you can get the soil tested, and then they would also give you recommendations of what you would need to do, what type of amendments might be necessary. And with those recommendations, sometimes they may advise for, chemical options, but if there's something you can research and see what you can do as an organic alternative to using chemicals on your ground. And one good part about that is that once you get your soil in balance, you really don't have to worry about it as much. It's not like I don't test my soil every year. I know my soil was in balance from the initial soil test. And from that point on, I really haven't been concerned with testing it and seeing. I just make sure that I do add back things that I know that are good for the soil and for the garden. There are products, they're more common now that you can use to add the microorganisms to your soil. There's some things that we're going to talk about that are naturally good for that, like the compost. But nowadays you can get things that are commercial products that are very good, and you can use those. This photo is a compost bin, and it's one way that you can use to add that soil life and to add fertilization to your soil in a natural way. And it's just a matter of breaking down organic matter. There are specific recipes that you can use that will provide you with the best quality, highest quality compost. And it's generally a mix of different things. Like you wanted some browns, some carbons, which are things like dried leaves and wood chips, and then you want some green material, like as yard, such as yard waste, grass clippings, things like that. And you use those in a certain ratio, and then there a small amount of something that's nitrogen, like some type. Some people you will use manure, or some people use like fish meal, just something like that. And then you would let your compost piles heat up, and over time they will break down. And if you do your compost correctly, build it properly, you can make compost in a very short period of time. This photo shows another option that you have. This is an area on my property here where last fall I planted a cover crop. And these are just, seeds that you can plant of different varieties of plants that will grow up. And then you just let them grow. And eventually you're going to either cut them and till them, or just till them in under the ground. And that's something that, especially if this is an initial area that you're turning into a garden, a cover crop is really good for that. And that's what was going on here. This was an area where I had never had anything planted in this space before. It was just sod. So I used a tiller to break that up, and then I planted the cover crop. And then I tilled in that cover crop. And now I'm in the process of putting another high tunnel over this space. So that's what I'm turning that area into. And back behind it, you can see that there are piles of wood chips. That's something else that has a lot of different uses. Here is another option. Rather than making compost, you can let worms create your compost. They can create what's called earthworm castings, which are really good for plants, for your garden. There are lots of things you can do with earthworm castings, like make teas. You can make fertilizers with them, and you just use the earthworms and you just feed them. You can give them kitchen scraps, your waste, your leftovers, certain things you don't want to give them, but most organic matter you can give them, and they'll eat that, and they'll turn it into earthworm castings, which is the what is in the photo on the lower right side. Also, take advantage of whatever organic matter you can get in your area. Where I was in Pennsylvania, everyone would collect their leaves and put them out on the side of the street for collection. And I would use those leaves. I would collect those leaves. And also, I would get, like in this photo, the companies that come and clear the power lines, they have to come every so often and clear the limbs that were in going to grow up into the power lines. And they would just come in and dump their loads, because they're always looking for places where they can unload the chips that they cut, because there's so much that they gather. And I just would let them come on my property and just dump the loads there. And then I would use that, for so many things. You can use that to make compost. You can use that for mulches. And I use it for growing mushroom production. So there's tons of things you can do with the wood chips. The next mistake is focusing on common fruits and veggies exclusively. A lot of people, they just grow certain crops. They grow, tomatoes, that's a big one, or maybe potatoes and beans. And even those, they just grow the whatever variety they can find at the store. It might be one variety of, you know, sh- um, can't even think of a name of one of the common green beans, but Blue Lake or something like that. But they would just grow those, and that would be what they would focus on. But there's so many other options available to us. And that bullet point there says there's a world of interesting and exciting veggie varieties. And that's something that if I go in a grocery store, the varieties that you find there, I don't even grow, because if I go there and they're selling like green beans, or they're selling, white potatoes. I'd rather grow purple green beans, or blue potatoes. And, I just like to get that variety, something different. And one of the things is it has a different look to it, which I enjoy. I like that. I mean, also, you're going to be getting different nutrients. That color is an indication of the nutrients that are in the plant. And by getting the different colors, that ensures you of getting different nutrients that you might not otherwise be getting. You might be missing out on, like nowadays, people are familiar with like red and associating that with lycopene or the orange and beta carotene. So those colors are indicative of certain nutrients. And there are some that are missing from our diets. The other unusual or just different varieties, some of them are better suited to the garden and also to the small scale farmer. Because a lot of times with the commercial farmers, they're looking for the variety that's going to be, you know, the easiest to grow. It's going to be uniform, meaning that they can harvest it all at one time. It's going to have certain characteristics, maybe that it is a better crop to ship. It won't be damaged in shipping because it's tougher. So yeah, that might be good for a farmer, but it's not good for the backyard gardener or the small scale farmer because you can pick things and you're not shipping it. It's only going from your garden to the kitchen. So there's not much time for it to be damaged in shipping. You don't have to worry. That's not a concern for you. So why not go with some plants that are more flavorful, they're more tender, and because you don't have to worry about that being an issue of shipping. So those are the types of things that are issues for a farmer, but they're not issues for you. Also the flavors. You have the option or opportunity to get things that or grow things that are just so much better tasting than some of the options, some of the varieties that they typically grow and make available at the store or the market. One example is garlic. Usually if you buy garlic, you're going to be getting there's one brand of garlic, variety of garlic that's typically grown and sold in the stores. But if you look, you'll find that there are so many different types of garlics, different colors. The clove, the wrapper colors are a little different. The flavors are different. Some of them are great for cooking. Others are great for eating raw. Some, are more spicy. So just knowing that you can grow the varieties that are best for what you're going to use them for or what your tastes are. That next point there also talks about the nutrition, which I touched on a little bit. But there are crops that are known to have higher levels of certain nutrients, and you can identify those or look for those, seek those out, and grow those, and that's going to be a benefit for you health wise. And a lot of these things, different varieties are things that you would never find for sale at the market because they're just, nobody's interested in growing those. It might take more effort to grow them or to harvest them. So you would never find them. And some, and I don't know, it's just why you don't see them. Even things like, I grow hardy kiwis. You don't see those at the market too often. And there are just a ton of crops that I grow that I never find those at the market. We're going to look at some as we go along. Another benefit of doing this is that you get things that have a greater appeal in the kitchen, or if you're selling them at a farmer's market, there's going to be more interest in those things because people, especially once they become familiar with you and they've tried some of the things that you grow, they're more, you know, ready, more interested in growing these things, just knowing what your track record is, what you've grown, and the success and the interest, the flavors, the things that you've brought to them in the past. They'll be willing to try something, even if it's new to them. And seek out sources for high quality seeds and plants. So that's one of the things, and we're going to talk about that a little later, as well as starting your own seeds and transplants. But I'll hold off on that for a little bit. This picture, it's an example. It shows some eggplants, a basket of eggplants. These are eggplants that I grew, and you can see most people are familiar with the dark purple eggplants. That's all they know is an eggplant. But there are other colors you can get, like the striped eggplant, the ones that are longer shaped, in different colors. There's green, they're rose colored. So there's just so much variety available in the plant world that we never become aware of that we just don't know about. But you can see how attractive that is. And again, here on the left side, there's okra. Most people think of okra, oh, okra is just green, but no, there's different colors of okra. There you can see some red ones. You can see the ones that are like um, white or blonde colored. So it's just indicative of how much variety is available to us, but we just don't know about it. We aren't aware of it. On the upper right side, those are all peppers, different types of peppers, different flavors, different colors. In the lower right, that's spinach. And you can see that there's a variety, diversity in spinach. And some of it is the shape of the leaf, the color. You can see some have the reddish tinge to them, and others that have a lighter green. But there's just a lot of variety and diversity in the plant world, just in general. These are all root crops. There are carrots in there are rutabagas, there's some beets, there are radishes. Um, so, carrots, there are some dark black colored or purple carrots. It's just so much available to us that we're never become aware of it, but we can grow them. We can grow them and have them available. You're not going to be able to just go out and buy things like this, but you can grow them yourself. On the left side of this photo, that's a different types of kale. You can see there are different colors, different leaf shapes. The upper right, those are cherry tomatoes. Again, there's so many different colors and shapes, and you can see the ones that have the dark shoulders, and that's also an indication of the nutritional value that they contain. The lower right, there's a sample of different types of carrots. And most people, when they think of carrots, they just think, oh, carrots are orange. But no, carrots are all different colors, yellow and whites and purples and reds. This is an example of something that you won't find at the market or at the store, but you can grow them yourselves. And I grow these. These are called honeyberries. Some people confuse them a little bit with blueberries, but if you look at them, you can see the shape is different. These are more elongated than round, and these are also larger than blueberries. But one of the things I really like about these is that they are super early. This is the earliest fruit that I have from my garden. These are mature, ripe, weeks before blueberries. So this is the earliest fruit that I get. And they are very, I'm getting to the point where I like them better than blueberries. And they have a more of a sweet, tart flavor to them. But so it's unique, but they are definitely good. And nowadays, you also hear so often people coming out talking about the latest, greatest superfood or superberry. And I'm sure, this will be on the list soon. It's just, and I think they just rotate, go down the list because they're all superfoods. Growing plants at the wrong times. And this is a big mistake that people make. They think that, okay, in the springtime, I'm going to start my garden. I'm just going to plant everything and I'm just going to wait. And when it's ready to harvest, I'll harvest it and enjoy it. But it doesn't always work like that because the timing is very important to get success in your garden. There are plants that they like to grow at a particular time. And if you plant them at the wrong time, the plants are going to struggle. Like even if you get a harvest from them, it's not going to be the best harvest that you could have gotten or the best quality if you plant them at the wrong time. They enjoy growing under specific conditions. For example, a lot of plants like to grow and mature when the weather's cool. Others, they prefer growing in the middle of the summer. So that's just something that you have to keep in mind and plant accordingly. Because if you plant them at the wrong time, you're just not going to get the production or the quality that you're looking for. Other plants require just a long growing season. So those are the ones that you need to start early, like tomatoes are an example, and peppers and eggplants. If you're in a short growing season, you're going to have to start those indoors and then transplant them outdoors after the weather warms up enough. So you need to become familiar with your growing zones, your climate, the seasons in your area, and the proper timing for the various crops that you would like to grow. This photo is an example of one of the cool weather plants. This is a variety of kale, and it enjoys kale is kind of unique and one of my favorite plants because you can grow it pretty much throughout the year. You can grow it as a cool weather crop, but it'll tolerate growing during the summer, during warm weather too. And then again, you can grow it in the fall as well as during the spring. But here, this one is growing in the fall. And one of the differences is that if you grow it in the season that it prefers, you're just going to get different results in terms of things like the colors. Like this one, you can see the pink or purple coloration to the veins and to the stems. That's really going to be the most noticeable when it's growing during the cool weather of fall than if you're growing it any other time of the year. And also the nutritional value is going to be at the highest if this is grown during the cool weather. And it's something that you'll be able to notice once you become familiar with the plant. You'll see the difference. It's going to be obvious just looking at it that this plant is happier, it's more productive, it's growing better when it's planted and grown in the proper season. Root crops, that's another one that a lot of them prefer the cool weather, things like turnips and even radishes. Well, radishes, they'll tolerate heat. Potatoes, they're a root crop, they'll tolerate the warm temperatures. But a lot of them, they prefer the cooler weather, and even the cooler temperatures have an impact on the flavor, both for leafy greens and some of the root crops. The flavor changes after they've been exposed to like frost or some cold weather. On the upper left, upper right side there, those are winter squashes. And there you can see the difference in diversity that's in the seed. I believe these were all the same seed that was planted, but they just have the squash itself has different colors and different patterns, even some differences in the sizes and shapes, just because that seed has some natural diversity there, which is to me, that's a good thing. That's what I look for. I want to have seed that has that type of diversity to it. In the winter squash is a little different because you plant those, they grow in the summertime, but yet you're harvesting them closer towards the fall, and then you're storing them, you're keeping them into the winter, and they store really well. The lower right side, that's melons like this muskmelon. They love the warm temperatures, the heat. And then once they're ready, you harvest them. They're have a short shelf life. You're not going to be able to store these over a long period of time like you could something like the winter squash. This photo is just showing you this is also in the fall. I can tell because it has frost on the leaves. And I see there are lettuces in there, and there are also strawberries. Those are strawberry plants. And what I did here, I was planting strawberries, and the strawberries were going to grow and spread. So in the meantime, while they were still small, I just planted lettuce in between the rows of the strawberries. And then when the lettuces were ready to harvest, I just cut the lettuce and then gave the strawberries more room to keep growing. A lot of people plant strawberries in the spring or summer, and then they intend to harvest it the following spring. But now, one technique that's becoming more popular is to plant your strawberry plants in the fall to produce that following spring. And then just treating them kind of like an annual that you overwinter. It mean they'll produce from planting in September, they'll produce fruit like that following spring in May, June, in that time frame. The next mistake is going to be related to weed control. And this is a big one with a lot of people. And even if you can don't even have to ask. You can just look and see their gardens and see how, in the springtime, they're out there gardening and everything looks good. And by the time summer rolls around, it's just like a tangle of weeds out there. And that's something that people struggle with, but it's one of the things that could be the easiest fix for you because it is kind of totally within your control to manage. It's not like an insect pest that you may have trouble just controlling. Weeds is something that you can just, mechanically, you can just, with your technique, you can keep them under control for the most part. There are some exceptions. But the key to controlling weeds is to start controlling them before you can even see them. When you just cultivate the ground, and I'm not talking about like tilling a deep cultivation. I'm talking like just scratching the surface. When you do that, if the weed plant is small, that's going to be enough to kill it. And you can just go through with a hoe or the different tools that you can use for cultivation, for weed control, that will take care of the weeds. And doing it that way, the weeds are never going to get ahead of you. Whereas if you wait until the weeds are grown and you can see them, and then you're going out there and you're trying to control them by going through and pulling all the weeds, that's a big mistake. Another option that you have is to use organic mulches, some things like straw or wood chips. Those are types of things that you can use to control weeds, especially if you're talking about a perennial area where you're growing perennial plants. I don't like using things like, especially the wood chips. I don't like using those in an area where you're growing annual crops because then the wood chips aren't going to break down in that short period of time. They're going to be there and they're still going to be on the ground, the next season. So then you have to deal with them at that point. Also, avoid introducing weed seeds in the garden. So how do you do this? One way is by you never let weeds grow and get to the point where they're producing seed. And that's what a lot of people do. They'll be gardening and then at the end of the summer, they will have grown garden, they'll have harvested a lot, and then they just let the garden go and they leave the weeds out there. They let them grow and they let them go to seed. And the next thing you know, there's like just tons of weed seeds in your soil. And when you get weed seeds in your garden, they can be in the soil and they'll just wait until the right time. And it could be, 2 years from now before they said, okay, we're going to germinate now and we're going to start growing. So you just want to avoid as much as possible letting weed seeds get a hold in the garden. There's specific hand tools that you can use to make weeding easier. And a lot of these are on the market there. I'm going to share some things that I like to use that you can use, but really you could use a fork. I'm talking about like a kitchen fork to cultivate your soil and keep your weeds down. That's something, anything will work. It's just a matter of kind of scratching the surface of the soil. And again, this has to be when the weeds are small or even before they're visible in order for that to work. Okay, the picture on the left side, that is one of my high tunnels. And you can see that the spacing is another factor in controlling the weeds. If you space them properly, you want them to be far enough apart so that when the plants are maturing, they're filling in that bed and they're just starting to touch. And when you do that, if you keep the weeds under control at this stage, then as they go along, they're going to get to the point where they can manage, they can control the weeds on their own. Like on the right side, you can see examples at the top and the bottom. These are where the weeds were kept under control, kept in check when the plants were small. And now that the plants are mature and larger, their weeds aren't going to be able to outcompete those plants. The weeds aren't even going to be able to germinate. That's one of the things that if the soil is covered, that helps prevent the weeds from germinating. A lot of the weeds, they're going to need some light in order to even germinate. And otherwise, they're not going to, they're just going to stay dormant. So you can see on the right, that's right side. Those are examples of what you want. You want the mature plants to be to that point where they still have room to grow, but they're beginning to touch and they're completely covering the growing bed. This is one of my gardens here in West Virginia, and I probably garden on maybe an acre, or maybe 3 acres, including like the orchard area. But this is just to show you I have two high tunnels in this picture, and then a couple of beds that are pretty long. But I can manage weeding these on my own and taking care of the plants in them. And even with, you can look and see there's not a lot of weeds in here. And then that's because I've stayed on top of it. I've, gone out, and for me to cultivate that, even both of those beds, I could probably do that in an hour. And if I did that once a week, that would be enough to keep the weeds under control in that area. This picture on the right side, those are sweet potatoes, and those plants have probably been in the ground for maybe 3 weeks. And you can see how far they're spaced, maybe 3 feet apart between the rows and 12 to 18 inches in within the row. And on the upper right side, that those are the same sweet potato plants. And maybe 2, 3 weeks later, excuse me, and they begin to vine out a little bit. So they've started to spread and cover the ground. But I'm still at this point, I'm still, keeping it weeded in between those plants. But the photo on the upper right, that's getting close to like the last time that I will go through there and even try to weed those plants. And one thing that I didn't mention is if you when you're weeding those, you can use some of the tools and devices to get between the rows, but sometimes and even between the plants within the row. But sometimes right next to the plant, you might have to go through and hand weed those. But that wouldn't take that long. And if again, you're going to do that when the plants are small. And if you did that once at the stage in the photo on the left, then you should be fine. You shouldn't have to get that close to the plant again. And the plant on the lower right side, those are the same sweet potatoes. And I see some weeds in there, but there's nothing in there that's going to disrupt the production, interfere with the potato growth or the production there. So again, you don't at that stage, you don't have to really worry about doing any weeding. And I don't. Next thing I would be doing with those is harvesting them. This is just another photo. This is kale in a raised bed, but it is showing you how the plants, your produce is covering the entire bed. So there's really nothing, no weeding that's needed there. And this is going to be the case once most of your plants get larger and mature. If you stay on top of the weeds before, when they're younger, the plants are going to be able to control the weeds themselves. Here are some of the tools that I like to use. On the left side, that's a wheel hoe. And that's something that if you're growing like large gardens and you're growing your plants in rows, that's something that is really good for weeding. You can just do different attachments that you can use on that. In this one, it just looks like they have the little teeth connected. That's what they're using. But with that, you just go up and down. And again, you're scratching the surface. You're not trying to turn soil over. You're not trying to go down deep. You're just, scratching the soil, disrupting the weeds when they're small. And by that being on a wheel, it's easy. You can just go up and down your rows, and you go back with a little back and forth motion. You're not just pushing it. You're going back and forth a little bit, but you can cover a lot of ground very quickly. That's why this is probably my favorite tool for using for weed control for large areas if I'm growing plants in rows. On the upper right, that's another little cultivator, which I really like those as well. And the same way, you can cover a lot of ground with that pretty quickly. On the lower right, you see some different types of hoes, and most people are familiar with the standard traditional hoe, but there's some other ones out there like a diamond hoe, which is you can see on the bottom right there has DeWitt Diamond Hoe. That's probably one of my favorite hoes because it's sharp. It has points on the end, so you can get in close to the plants, and you can also with that, even though you're doing it by hand, you can cover a lot of ground quickly with those. This is just another photo that shows you, these are plants, different types of greens. They're planted in rows, and yeah, I've controlled the weeds with between the rows, and now I'm to the point where I could probably just let that go because those plants are going to grow out and they're going to be covering even the space enough of the space between the rows. If not, I could still, just go back through there with a hoe or the wheel hoe and just get the center part of that row or the rows on the field. The next mistake is thinking that you don't have a room for a garden. You can't grow anything, any food because you don't have a backyard or you just don't have enough space. You don't have a lawn, but that's not true either. If you're interested, you can always find a way to grow food even without having a backyard. One thing that I've done in the past is, I've grown gardens in places that weren't my property, that where I even didn't even live. Friends or family would let me use their yard and let me plant there. And, I would share the produce with them. And sometimes they would even help me with doing the work in the garden. But that's another option that you have. If you have if you even if you're in an apartment and you have a patio or a deck, you can grow produce there. You can grow veggies and even fruits in containers. If you're in an urban area, there's more than likely there's a community garden nearby. That's another great option. And it's not as convenient because if it's not like right where you live, but still it is a great option that you can utilize. If you don't want to do any of those, you can even do things like raise sprouts and microgreens indoors. There are people that do that, and they even will grow enough to go to a farmer's market and sell microgreens and sprouts and turn that into a business. So that's something else that you can do. So whatever your situation, there is a way for you to grow produce and grow some of your food. This is a community garden in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and I used to work with some of the growers there. But this was a garden that they started. It was at a hospital on their grounds, and they just decided they wanted to have a community garden, and that's what they did. And it was a really nice setup, and they used raised beds, and people really enjoyed being able to take advantage of that. These pictures are some examples of what you can do on the left side using that vertical space. Again, you're growing up. If you're limited on space, take advantage of that vertical space. The upper right, that's a raised bed. And you can see that they're utilizing what would be called the intensive planting, where you're growing the plants closer together. And that's one thing that is different from the way what farmers do. Farmers need to have that space between rows in order to get their equipment in the fields and between the plants. You don't have to worry about that. You're not going to be driving a tractor or anything through there. So you can plant your plants a lot closer together. So you don't necessarily need to go by what the seed packet says. In the lower right, there's an example of growing plants in containers. There's all kind of, see, there's turmeric, there's a fig tree. So it's just herbs. There's so many things that you can grow in containers. Here more of kind of those looks like those are all fruit trees. And I see one like kiwi plant. They're growing, all of those are in containers. And this was my property in Pennsylvania. And here you can see, it's kind of hard to tell the depth here, but this is from the a patio. So up on the top of the or a deck. So up on the top of the deck, there were things growing in the containers. Then down on the patio, you can see that where there's like a wooden trellis, that was like a raised bed. So there are things growing in there. There's a trellis there with kiwis growing on it. And then in the background, you can see there's a main garden where there are plants growing in the ground. So there, I would plant things, anywhere I had space. Like I mentioned earlier, how I had fruits and beds and bushes along the sides of the house. So you can just utilize whatever space you have. The next mistakes, again, something that a lot of people do, they don't realize or recognize the difference or the importance of using higher quality seeds. And nowadays, it's becoming more of an issue because seeds and plants are becoming so expensive. It's just kind of crazy how much they charge for them. But there's an easy way for you to get around that. We're going to talk about that. But regardless, you still want to start with the highest quality seeds that you can find because there's a big difference between, seed from a reputable seed house versus something that you would pick up at the dollar store. There's a difference. And you want to choose varieties that are adapted to your region and to your climate. There are some seed suppliers that do raise seeds that are for particular regions. Like I had friends that they had a company, Fruition Seeds. They were in New York, and their focus was on growing seeds that were adapted to their climate. So sometimes you can find that. Other times you can, buy seeds that may not be adapted, but then grow them and adapt them yourself. I like to use heirloom and open pollinated seeds. And main reason why I like to use them is because the variety, the diversity you can find, and I like growing things that are different, unique, but also the fact that if you grow these, you can save seeds from them and you're not going to have an issue. Whereas if you grow certain hybrids, you can still, and this is a misconception. People think if there's a hybrid plant that you can't save seed from it, but in reality, you can. It's just that you're not guaranteed what the result is going to be. And it may take some additional effort and skill to get that hybrid seed to the point where it's going to be reliable and where you can depend on it. And that's just, a whole nother topic there. But just in general, using heirloom and open pollinated seeds, even if you're growing different varieties, which I'll grow different varieties, I'll grow them together, I'll let them cross pollinate, and I'll save the seed. And I know that those seeds are still going to be good. I'll still be able to use the seed and they're going to be fine. And that's the next point there. Learn to grow and save your own seeds. That's another thing that's important because even if you develop your skills as far as growing your food and knowing how to produce and take care of your plants, if you have to go and buy seeds every year, you're still not going to have much in the way of food independence. You're still going to have to go back and purchase seeds. And in some cases, it could be where there's a particular variety that you enjoy growing, and you go, and it could be that you go one year and a seed supplier says, "Oh, we no longer carry that." So then, that could be something that does really well in your area or in your soil, and now you just lost it because they're not going to provide it to you anymore. So it's just important, and it's something that a lot of people neglect, and they, take that for granted. But it is something that we do need to strive to learn how to grow our own seeds. And beware of commercial transplants at the local stores, whether it's some of the Home Depots and Lowe's or even some of the nurseries. There are issues, and I'm going to share some examples of that in a minute. And a lot of you are familiar with GMOs, and you know that genetically modified is something that you want to avoid, whether it's a seed, a plant, or food, it's best to avoid them. So here are the examples I mentioned of being careful of the plants and seeds that you buy. These are some examples of why. On the left side there, those are red romaine leaf lettuces. And here, there, the plants look okay. I can't, knock the plants themselves, but what I can knock is when you look down at the bottom there, that price, $5.48. That's what they're charging for those. And that's just, to me, that's crazy. And prices even this year, I've seen have continued to increase. So who knows where they're going to stop? It's getting to the point where, is it even worth it if you're buying, especially if you're buying on a small scale? And on the right side there, those are radish plants. And I have a couple of issues with that. For one thing, radish, you can get a pack of seeds, and radish grows so quickly that there's no need to get like an early start by starting the seed indoors in containers. You're not really gaining anything. You're probably going to be, more of a disadvantage trying to do that. And then down on the lower right side, you can see those are radishes also. And these are in the flat that you're buying the plants, and they already have radishes on them. So again, that's not what you want. You're not going to get the highest quality, even if you did plant those and they grew. That's just too late. That these are going to be kind of root bound, and they're not going to provide you with the best quality. Here's another example. This was at a nursery, and that's why sometimes I'll go to a nursery, I'll go to, Lowe's or something, I'll see something, I'll be like, oh, I gotta take a picture of that. So that's what I do. But these are some spinach seedlings, plants that they have for sale. And if you look at the one over on the lower right side, you see where it looks like a little flower or something growing, that's a seed stalk. That spinach is going to seed, even though it's only like a couple inches tall. And that's, you want to avoid that because that's like a bonsai plant. That's not going to, at that point, it's not going to provide you with much in the way of spinach leaves. And anytime a plant like that is going to seed, it's going to be poor quality as far as eating because when things like that go to seed, if it, for example, if it was lettuce when it grows to seed, the leaves get bitter. You know, other things that the crop, I'm trying to think of an example, like carrots. Once carrots start going to seed, there's going to get the carrot itself is going to get woody, so it's not going to be edible. So you're going to just have lots of issues like that if you're growing or buying and planting transplants that aren't at the proper stage or are too mature. And in this case, it's not only that it's too mature, but it's been forced to mature. These are, only an inch or two tall. So it's just because they're desperate. They know they don't have much time left and they've been stunted. So they're just trying to finish their life cycle by producing some seed. And even if they produce seed, that wouldn't be seed that you would want to plant because it would be kind of the nature of the seed would be to fruit and seed and flower early because it thinks that's what it needs to do in order to survive. So avoid things like that and be on the lookout for it when you're at the nursery. Another thing with things like this, you'll see it sometimes where the nursery, they'll have these plants in the springtime and they'll be selling them. And then what doesn't sell, they'll just keep and then they'll put it out or leave it out or bring it back out in the springtime and people will then go and buy it and it's no way. They're set up for failure. That's it's not going to produce. On the right side here, there's corn, and you can see those little containers. Looks like it might have four stalks of corn in it, which isn't what you want to do to, grow four together that closely. And then if you try to separate them, you're going to be damaging the roots, and that's going to be stunning the plant to some degree. Plus, that's $5 for just one little container like that of four corn. And even with corn, if you're familiar, you know that corn has to cross-pollinate, and the wind is what um, allows it to cross-pollinate, and you want to plant corn in blocks. So it's just so many failures with buying that and with the way that they're selling that. On the upper right side, that looks like cauliflower. But again, if you look at the one in the center, that's going to see, or it's starting to form. It's starting to form cauliflower bud, but it's only 2 inches tall. Again, that's never going to produce a edible head of cauliflower. It's going to be, maybe the size of a dime. That's how big around it's going to be. And then down at the bottom, some things just don't make sense. Like people selling you, green beans that are started in six packs like that, because you can buy a whole package of bean seeds for less than what you're going to pay for a six-pack of the plants. And you're really not going to get any benefit advantage from trying to grow them from a transplant. But that lower right, that's garlic. And again, I just wouldn't grow garlic, wouldn't buy garlic plants like that. Better option is to just grow your own seeds, your own transplants. Here, is an example. These are just nasturtium seeds. They're just growing in a little like flat little, food container. You can get those. You can even use the covers as a humidity dome to get them to germinate better. But you can just look at those and see how healthy they are. And that's, better than any, I don't even see nasturtiums that look like that even if you buy them in a six pack that are grown properly. Next to it, you can see where I was using some solo cups. In both of these, the solo cups and the food container, I would drill some small holes in the bottoms to get some drainage, but they'll do fine as an option for growing seeds. Now, just to close, earlier on I mentioned about the best fertilizer is the gardener's footsteps, and that's a saying. I don't know who said it, but the whole point was that the gardener's footsteps are good for the garden because, if you're there, it's your attention, it's your presence, it's your being there. It's going to be something, the best thing for the plant. And that's why it's the best fertilizer. But then I also add that it's also the best insecticide because if you're there, if you're in the garden, you're going to see if there's an insect issue. You're going to see when it's first getting started. If you're there and you're observant, you're aware of your plants and if in that case you can address it at the earliest stage, and that makes it easier for you to control it. The same if there's a disease, your presence is going to be the best herbicide or the best irrigation system because you're going to be able to watch your plants and know when they need to be watered or know if there's something, rabbits or groundhogs, something being a pest to the garden. You're going to notice that if you're there. But if you never are in your garden, like you should be in your garden every day, really, even if it's just to enjoy the sights and sounds that are there. And that's something that is going to be the best thing for the garden as well. Okay, so now we're going to have time. I'm going to pass it back over to Sister Nicole. And before I do that, I also wanted to share that I do workshops here on my property in West Virginia. I also have some online courses that you can access through the website at coregardening.com. And you're welcome if you'd like to come out and visit and take a workshop. I also do farm stays for people that are interested or are familiar with country life and they want to see what it's like. You can come out, you can stay, for a few days or a couple weeks, and you can just relax and chill and get some quiet time, or you can do a workshop. I do private workshops as well as the group workshops that I schedule. So I wanted to let you know about that as well, and you're all welcome to come out. Okay, so I am gonna close my presentation screen. Oh, wait a minute, let me share. There's my contact information also. The website is coregardening.com and my phone number is 717-580-0501. My email is kenny.point@gmail.com. And those are the best ways to contact me. So thank you, and let me close the presentation.
Thank you so much, Brother Kenny. Sister Nicole got um kicked off the platform,
Oh,
so I
okay.
will take over Sister Tamika. So if there's any question, you can go ahead and ask them. You can unmute yourself and ask. Um, I see some questions in the chat also, but if someone wants to ask a question, they can go ahead and before I um say the ones.
Okay, I'm looking at the chat now and I see there were some questions there. And Veronica had asked about collecting the soil samples. And usually they'll give you instructions if you get the kit to get a soil test done. They'll give you some suggestions for collecting a sample. It's not complicated. You can just use a trowel, or they do also have the little core devices where you can just press it down and it will pull out a soil sample. So you can get those. In some places, they will even give you, like here, the farm agency, they will lend you a core sample to use to take your sample, and then you just return it after you're done. And I see another question about living around other farmers and nurseries as far as pesticide drifting to your property and getting into the well water. So I'm fortunate that where I am, there are no other farmers around me. That can be an issue. It can also even be an issue just in terms of pollination. If someone's growing GMO plants around you, there can be an issue with, your plants crossing with some GMO crops. That's been an issue in some areas, especially if you're somewhere where you're growing, like you're farming, you're just growing lots of corn or something like that. So yeah, that can be an issue, and I don't really have a solution for that part of it. And some people have really even had an issue from Monsanto or companies, and then, trying to charge them or taking them to court or sue them for using their their crops that are, contaminating their non-GMO crops, which is crazy. So, but that I guess it's just going to be dependent on where you are and, what part of the country you're living in, and something to be aware of and consider if you're buying a property somewhere. As far as pesticides, again, there's no one close to me or close enough. which is another reason why if you have the opportunity to purchase some property or some land, if you have enough that you're going to have a buffer for things like that, for pesticides drifting where they can't drift onto your crops, that would be probably the best solution. And it's again, that would also apply to your well water. And for me, I collect rainwater, so um, I don't know how much risk there is with that because I'm sure there's pollutants that can get into rainwater as well. And someone's asking about the moon patterns in the Farmer's Almanac, and I don't put too much faith into the. I do believe that the moon has an impact on your crops, but I don't put much effort into trying to plant according to the moon or the moon phases. I just personally, I don't. Some people do, but and if that's something that's a concern, then you could research that. I really couldn't advise you on how to manage that. And there's another question about the wooden structure, if that was for growing plants vertically. And yes, that was a trellis that could use to grow plants vertically. And another question about if weeds and how is it true that they come if there's something unhealthy in the soil or plant? Now, weeds can be an indicator of something with the soil. It might not be that there's something unhealthy, or it could just be that the soil is imbalanced. It's lacking a certain nutrient, or it could be just that the soil has been disturbed. So that is an indicator that you can tell by certain weeds that they will give you information on what's going on with that area or with that soil. And it's not necessarily something that's going to be a concern, like there's something toxic there, but it can give you information on what is going on with your land. And about the Dollar Tree says heirloom or non-GMO on the seeds, which that's fine. I mean, I myself, I prefer to use seeds from grow, and I know some of the growers, and even some of the growers, though I know some aren't the best quality, but still, at least I can know where the seeds are coming from versus something that is, even if it's labeled non-GMO or heirloom, it could be grown in China, and I just, have questions about their growing practices. So again, you just have to look at your options, your alternatives, and go from there. And do I ever walk barefoot in the garden? Yes, I do. And there's a whole thing with that about um, grounding. And some people really think and I kind of believe there could be something to that, that there is some health benefits from even things like being in contact, not just walking barefoot, but having your hands in the soil. I think that there is something to that where that does have a health benefit for us, and it can be important. And there's a question about growing in tires. And yeah, there could be something, toxic leaching from the tires, the material in the tires. But that's one of the things, you use what you have, what you can, what some things aren't in our control. And, we have to do the best that we know, and then from there, trust God God can protect us. There's no weapon that's formed against us that will prosper. So that's kind of my view on some things. And if it's something that I know or I'm suspect about, then yeah, I will avoid it. And the point about someone said that a presenter said that her healthy soil won't have weeds, they won't grow. I don't know. I don't agree with that. But because weeds, And the other thing with weeds is, what is a weed? A weed is sometimes a weed is just it's just a plant. And a lot of weeds are good. They're edible. Some of our vegetable garden seeds could be considered weeds. So no, it's no way that I would say that a weed won't grow in healthy soil. And I will add my email to the chat. Okay, I just added my email to the chat. And are there any other questions?
Hey,
There's a,
all right.
there's one
If
question.
there, okay,
There's one question about dandelion leaves and that they were in I guess, a plastic bag and now they're wet. So yeah, you can compost those. That would be fine.
all right. Thank you so much, Brother Kenny. It is always a pleasure listening to you. You know, your wealth of knowledge on farming is just amazing. And so thank you. Continue to let God use you. And yes, so I wish you all the best in also in your farming and in your other businesses. So I'm gonna ask you to close out with prayer.
Okay, let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we'd like to thank you for allowing us the opportunity to join together to discuss the garden and growing food and, producing things from the earth that you have blessed us with. We want to thank you and praise you for making it long and to use them also to draw us closer to you and help us to become less dependent on the world and more dependent on you. That's something that you've made available through the garden from the beginning. And that's always been part of your plan for us, Lord, for us to take advantage of that, for that to be a source of many things for us, Lord. We thank you and we praise you for doing that. We ask you that you continue to guide us and direct us, that you help us to grow gardens and healthy plants and to not just grow them, but to use the fruit of our work and to allow that to make us healthier, and to share with our communities and our friends, as well as using that as a way of witnessing and testifying of you to others in many ways. So we thank you and praise you and ask you to be with us and be with those that listen to the presentation on the recording. And if we need questions and answers that haven't been answered, just to know that you can give us and provide us with everything that we need to know and the ideas for the problems that we encounter, that you have the solutions, Lord, and that you can provide the answers to us. We ask you and praise you in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again, Brother Kenny.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
And thanks to everyone on the platform for coming. It is always a pleasure to have you. And see you next time for our presentation. You will see the flyers as soon as it is ready. Right? Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Oh,
Rest of
Sister
the day.
Simpson, before you leave, we put our email in the chat like you asked, but
Yes, I already took a picture of it. So once
okay.
the recording is ready, you
All
will
right.
receive.
Thank you. And thank you again, Brother Kenny.
You're
Wonderful.
welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.